There was this flutter in my chest all day, part nerves, part pride. Mark had told me it was going to be the event of the year, the kind of evening where people wear their success like a badge. And I was proud of him. I really was. After everything we'd been through, the late-night takeout dinners, the months where my paycheck kept the lights on, the weekends he locked himself in the office, this felt like a victory for both of us. So I told myself, tonight, I get to celebrate too. I'd bought a new dress, not something flashy, just elegant, midnight blue with a subtle shimmer that made me feel seen. I even got new heels, even though my feet were already protesting before we left the house. My makeup was the best I'd done in years. As I looked in the mirror, there was a moment, just a moment, where I didn't feel like his plus one. I felt like a woman who had earned her place. But deep down, a voice whispered, "You don't quite belong here, do you?" I silenced it. I've been silencing that voice for years. When we arrived, everything sparkled. The glasses, the floors, even the smiles. Mark was in his element. He shook hands like a man born for the spotlight, laughed just the right amount, posed when asked. People greeted him with admiration and warmth, and I stood by his side, soaking it all in. I smiled when they toasted him. I clapped when they mentioned his name. For a while, I truly felt like I was part of something golden. But that was before I met her. She approached like she owned the room. Sleek black dress, confident stride, and that kind of smile women give when they're not actually smiling. "Mark," she purred, touching his arm in a way that felt far too familiar for my comfort. "You were incredible up there." Then her eyes flicked to me like I was an afterthought. "Oh, you must be. Amy, how sweet. You came." That last part landed like a slap wrapped in silk. I smiled politely, but inside, something cracked. Her name was Vanessa, one of his coworkers. I'd heard the name before, just never with a face. She was everything I wasn't. Sharp, poised, magnetic in that curated, effortless way. The kind of woman who didn't just turn heads. She expected them to turn. And through the rest of the evening, it was like she had a sixth sense for when to reappear. Every time I let my guard down, there she was. Laughing too loudly at Mark's jokes. Leaning in too close. Throwing glances my way that dripped with something between pity and amusement. I tried to play it cool. I kept sipping my champagne, nodding along, reminding myself I had just as much right to be there as anyone else. But then the comments started. Subtle at first. "Mark deserves someone who matches his ambition, don't you think?" Or, "Not everyone can shine in a room like this." Her words were sharp enough to draw blood, but dipped in honey so no one else seemed to notice. Except me. I noticed every single one. Eventually, I couldn't pretend anymore. My jaw was tight from forced smiles, my chest knotted with each glance Mark didn't give me. When I finally leaned in and whispered, "Can we talk outside for a second?" He barely looked at me. "Amy," he muttered, just loud enough for the others at the table to hear. "You're overreacting. Don't make this uncomfortable." He didn't say it with anger. He said it with dismissal. Like I was the one causing a scene. Like I was the embarrassment in the room. I felt the sting immediately. The kind of sting that doesn't make you cry, not right away. It makes you freeze. My cheeks burned. My eyes scanned the table, wondering if anyone else felt the same shift I did. But they just went on sipping their drinks, chatting as if nothing had happened. And there I was, the invisible woman in the expensive dress who didn't know her place. I stood up slowly, quietly, and left the table without a word. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew, in that moment, none of them would have heard me anyway. The cold air outside wrapped around me like a truth I hadn't wanted to face. My heels clicked against the pavement as I walked alone to the car, my makeup holding on just long enough to shield me from breaking down in front of strangers. But something inside me had already started to shift. Not in panic, not in sadness, something quieter, and far more dangerous. The next morning, the silence between us was louder than any fight we'd ever had. Mark acted like nothing had happened, like the night before was just another successful event and I'd simply imagined everything. He even hummed while he made coffee. That humming used to calm me. Now it made my skin crawl. I watched him from across the kitchen, that familiar tie draped over his shoulder, his phone lighting up every few minutes. Probably her. Probably Vanessa. My mind kept replaying the way she touched his arm, the way she said my name like it was a punchline. I hadn't imagined that, and I sure as hell hadn't imagined the way Mark stood there and let her throw jabs, only to turn around and accuse me of making things uncomfortable. Jealous, he'd said. That word echoed in my skull, as if all the nights I stood by him meant nothing, reduced to petty insecurity in front of people who didn't even know me. He didn't defend me. He didn't see me. He chose her. That truth, heavy and sudden, settled somewhere deep inside. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I smiled. Just a little. Because if he thought last night was the end of that story, he didn't know me at all. I wasn't going to beg or argue or demand explanations. No, I was going to remember every little detail, how she smirked, how he dismissed me, and hold on to it, not out of pain, but because something inside me had quietly, calmly started to calculate. The office party wasn't just a one-night offense. It was the beginning of a pattern I suddenly couldn't unsee. The way Mark became glued to his phone, how he left the room to take calls, his voice lowering whenever I came near. I noticed it all. And Vanessa? She lingered. In his stories, in the casual mentions of team dinners, in the way he suddenly cared more about how he looked before heading to work. He didn't even try to hide it anymore, not from someone who knew him inside out. And then came the next blow, another company dinner. This time, a smaller gathering. Mark told me not to bother coming, said it would be too dull for me. That word, dull. As if I were furniture in the background of his real life now. He left in a hurry, cologne too strong, nerves too steady. I stared at the door after it closed behind him, hands gripping the wine glass I never intended to drink from. I didn't follow him. I didn't ask questions. I didn't cry. Instead, I picked up my phone, not to text him, but to begin my own little investigation. Vanessa's social media was spotless, but not invisible. There were hints, a wine glass on a table that looked like the one in our favorite restaurant. A reflection in the window that didn't belong to her. Mark's cufflink in a blurry photo captioned, "Just another late night with the dream team." It wasn't proof yet, but it didn't have to be. My gut had already confirmed what my eyes were just beginning to gather. But the real sting came when I finally decided to speak up, not with accusations, just questions. Calm ones. "Who was there last night?" I asked, tilting my head like I already knew. "Vanessa? Again?" Mark didn't even blink. He exhaled through his nose and gave that tired, irritated look men give when they're being interrupted. "Amy, can you not?" he said, not even turning to face me. "You're being paranoid. You do this all the time." No, I didn't. Not once. Not until her. That night, Vanessa's words returned, sharper than ever. "Not everyone can shine in a room like this." That wasn't just about the party. It was about my life. She saw me as dim, as disposable. And Mark? He let her. Hell, maybe he even agreed. I went quiet after that. Not because I had nothing more to say, but because I'd realized something important. I wasn't going to win this by arguing, not with him, not with her. They had the stage, the spotlight, the whispers in corridors, but I had the truth, and more importantly, the time. And so I let them think I was shrinking. I let him kiss my cheek out of habit. I let her smirk when we crossed paths in the office parking lot. I let them both believe I was still the woman standing silently by the buffet table. But what they didn't realize was that silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. When we got home from that last dinner, the one where I wasn't invited, I didn't fall apart. I sat in the dark for a while, shoes off, purse still on my shoulder. It was strange. I'd always imagined heartbreak as something loud, something that shattered you. But this was quiet, cold, clean. like a door slowly clicking shut. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even shocked anymore. I was done, not just with the betrayal, but with the role I'd played in letting it all unfold. I started remembering things, not out of nostalgia, out of clarity. Every late night I spent making sure he had dinner. Every bill I paid when he said his commission was delayed. Every time I skipped my own needs so he could shine. And what did I get in return? A front row seat to my own erasure. I'd given everything. And now I had nothing but receipts, literal and emotional, and a hollow space where my marriage used to live. But hollow spaces echo. And in that echo, something inside me stirred. I didn't plan revenge like a villain in a movie. I didn't light candles and chant. I opened a drawer, the one where we kept random things, stamps, old chargers, junk mail. That's where I found it. A crumpled envelope marked confidential. Something about client bonuses and offshore transfers. I remembered the name. I remembered the trip. Mark had bragged about the deal for weeks, said he made magic happen. I began to wonder just how much of that magic was legal, and how much of it Vanessa already knew. I stayed up most of that night, not pacing, not crying, just digging. I remembered things Mark had let slip over the years, back when he still talked to me like a partner. Names of clients, little workarounds. He thought I wasn't listening, but I was. I always was. I pulled up his old laptop, the one he thought I never used. Password? Our anniversary. Typical. What I found wasn't dramatic at first, just spreadsheets, email threads, forwarded invoices. But the more I read, the more the puzzle pieces stopped looking like numbers and started looking like a pattern. There were gifts listed under fake vendor names, flights booked for training weekends that matched exactly with the times I knew he was away, and Vanessa had gone silent. I even found an email Mark sent to her from his work account titled, "Perks of Playing Smart." Underneath, a PDF of his expense report, marked approved. My hands didn't shake. My pulse didn't rise. If anything, I felt calm. Like finding confirmation wasn't a shock. It was a validation. I hadn't been crazy. I'd been lied to, gaslit, and underestimated. The next morning, while Mark showered and hummed behind the bathroom door, I sat at the kitchen counter with my coffee and read his latest text out loud to myself. "You embarrassed me last night. Please don't ruin my reputation over a jealous moment." I smiled, really smiled, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes but stretches across your face anyway. Then I deleted it. Not because it hurt, but because it was meaningless now. The damage was already done. He just hadn't seen it yet. For days, I lived two lives. To Mark, I was the wife who had finally cooled off. I went quiet, I nodded, I even made dinner. And all the while, I was documenting, saving files, printing things he'd forgotten existed. I traced expense reports, cross-referenced travelogues, even remembered a time he came home drunk and mentioned a client gift that looked suspiciously like a diamond bracelet. Every detail I'd once brushed off became ammunition. Every overlooked moment was now evidence in a case only I knew I was building. It wasn't just about catching him in the affair anymore. That would have been too easy, and honestly, not satisfying enough. What I wanted was to show him what it felt like to have your reputation, your pride, your name, slowly peeled away. Because that's what he had done to me. Not in one explosive moment, but in tiny daily dismissals. He chipped away at me until there was almost nothing left to recognize. But now, I was reconstructing myself, not for him, but for me. And every step I took in silence only sharpened the blade I was about to wield. One afternoon, as I slipped another folder into my growing archive of truths, I heard Mark laughing in the next room, loud, carefree, unbothered. I tilted my head and smiled. I wasn't angry. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I was waiting. And the most dangerous person in any room is the one who already knows what comes next. 1 week later, the company released a glowing press announcement. Mark's name in bold, his photo cropped just right, words like visionary, integral, and future leader stamped all over the page. I stared at it for a while, not out of admiration, but calculation. The timing couldn't have been better. The higher the pedestal, the harder the fall. And Mark had climbed so high, he couldn't even see the ground anymore. But I could. And I knew exactly where to push. That same day, I slipped a manila envelope into a FedEx drop box. Then I sent 5 emails, one to HR, one to the board of directors, one to the ethics hotline, and 2 to senior partners whose names Mark had once bragged about impressing. Each message included a few attachments, screenshots of emails between him and Vanessa during office hours, records of client dinners, billed to the company card, copies of travel expenses that lined up a little too neatly with Vanessa's Instagram posts. No threats, no explanations, just facts. Cold, hard, timed facts. And then, as a final touch, I sent one last package. This one wrapped carefully, with a delicate pink ribbon and a sticky note right on top. It was addressed to Vanessa. Inside, a flash drive containing the same files, along with a simple message in my handwriting. You wanted him. You can have the fallout too. It wasn't spiteful. It wasn't even angry. It was surgical. Clean. The kind of move you make when you've already said goodbye, not just to the man, but to the version of yourself who tolerated all of it. There was no dramatic explosion, no company-wide scandal overnight. The silence was the best part. A day passed, then 2, and then the shift. Mark started coming home tense, phone calls in hushed tones, his voice tight, words clipped. He said things like misunderstanding and clearing things up. But I knew better. The ground beneath his golden pedestal had begun to crack. And the beautiful part? He still didn't know where the tremor had started. That made every moment at the dinner table feel like a private victory. He tried to play it cool, still put on that polished smile when he left for work, still called me babe, like we hadn't turned into strangers months ago. But at night, when he thought I was asleep, he'd sit in the living room, scrolling endlessly, rereading messages. I saw it all from the hallway. His shoulders hunched in a way they never used to be, his hand on his forehead like it physically hurt to think. It wasn't just his job that was unraveling, it was his image, his precious, curated, untouchable image. Vanessa, on the other hand, vanished from the picture almost immediately. Not a text, not a visit, not even a call. I imagined her opening that package, her fingers pausing on that sticky note. I wondered if she'd laugh or flinch, or finally understand that I wasn't the sweet little housewife she smirked at that night. Either way, she was gone. Transferred to another city, Mark said, like it was nothing. But I could see it in his face. He knew exactly why. And now, for the first time in a long time, he was the one being left behind. He asked me once, softly, "Did you send something?" I didn't look up from my book. I just turned a page and said, "What would I even send?" He stared at me for a long time after that, like he was searching for the woman he used to know. But she wasn't there anymore. I had let her go. The version of me who would have cried, pleaded, begged for answers. She'd been replaced. Now he sat across from someone who knew every inch of his empire and exactly where to cut it loose. The messages from his office got shorter, colder. Eventually, they stopped altogether. No more running late texts, no more company dinners, just silence. He was waiting, I could tell, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And that's what made it beautiful, because in his world, everything had always worked out. He thought charm could fix anything. He thought people like me wouldn't dare speak up. But I didn't just speak. I sang. I orchestrated every note, every lyric, and let the music rise in a room he couldn't control. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my sister. Not even the woman at the coffee shop who once gave me a knowing look when Mark walked ahead of me without holding the door. This wasn't for applause. This wasn't revenge for the sake of drama. It was something deeper. I was reclaiming my voice, not to scream, but to whisper in exactly the right ears. And oh, how loudly a whisper can travel when it's laced with the truth. It started with a text from a mutual friend. "Did you hear about Mark? Suspension, full investigation." I didn't reply. I just stared at the message for a while, letting it wash over me like warm rain on dry soil. There was no cheering, no dancing around the living room, just a long, steady breath, the kind your body takes when it finally realizes the danger has passed, the kind you don't even know you've been holding. I set the phone down, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of wine. Over the next few days, more news came in quiet waves. Mark was taking a leave of absence. Vanessa had been reassigned, a clean term for what was undoubtedly a quiet exit with a polite bow. No press releases now, no photo ops, just silence where their smugness used to be. And through it all, I didn't gloat. I didn't post cryptic quotes on social media or talk about karma. I simply moved through my days lighter, freer, like someone who had slipped out of a costume she'd worn for far too long. Then came the email, from the company's PR team of all people. It was polite, polished, and full of corporate gratitude. "We appreciate your efforts in helping us maintain our values and integrity. We would be happy to thank you privately, should you wish." I read it twice, smiled, and never responded. Their world wasn't mine anymore. I didn't need their thanks. I didn't need their validation. I had already won in ways they couldn't even begin to measure. That weekend, I hosted something small at my place. Nothing fancy, just a handful of people who made me laugh without effort and listen without judgment. Women I'd met through book clubs, yoga classes, neighbors I barely knew before, but somehow always smiled at me when Mark didn't. There was music, homemade bruschetta, a few too many bottles of sparkling rosé. The kind of night that didn't need occasion or excuse. And yet, to me, it felt like a coronation. I wore the same heels from the gala. Not out of nostalgia, but as a quiet act of defiance. They didn't hurt this time, maybe because I wasn't shrinking into them anymore. I was standing tall, not for a man, not for appearances, but for the version of me that had survived every subtle betrayal and every deafening silence. One of the women asked what the occasion was. "A new chapter?" she guessed. I just smiled, refilled her glass, and let the laughter in the room speak for itself. At one point, I stepped away from the group to take in the room. Warm light, soft jazz humming in the background, the scent of cinnamon and fresh flowers hanging in the air. No tension, no secrets, just presence. The kind I hadn't felt in years. I thought about the woman I'd been at that gala, hopeful, nervous, clinging to someone else's shine. She wasn't here anymore. She wasn't needed. Because this night, this joy, this room, it was mine. Later that evening, someone leaned in, glass of champagne in hand, and asked with a curious tilt of the head, "What changed? You're glowing." I paused, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I had too many. I thought about the betrayal, the humiliation, the long quiet nights where I rebuilt myself piece by piece. But none of that pain felt sharp anymore. It had become something else, something I carried with grace now, like a scar that no longer needed covering. I smiled and said, "Sometimes you have to be humiliated to remember who you are, and sometimes you need the right party to burn everything down." Her eyes widened, then she laughed, that rich kind of laugh that says, "I see you." And in that moment, I wasn't just someone who'd survived. I was someone who had chosen herself. Finally. Fully. Loudly. I raised my glass, not in a toast to revenge, but in reverence for the woman who came out the other side stronger, smarter, and far more alive. As the night stretched on and the last guests began to leave, I lingered by the window, watching the candles flicker against the glass. I didn't know exactly what came next, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I had no map, no timeline, no promises. Just a calm, steady fire inside, and the knowledge that I would never again let anyone dim it. The celebration wasn't over. It was just beginning.